Good evening, everybody. How you doing? My name is Wesley Cable, the host of the Obsessed with Wine podcast, and thank you so much. I've got a special Sunday night edition of the podcast tonight because this is a special guest. I want to make sure we could get him in here to talk about his wines and really educate us on everything that he's doing. So I'm super excited about that. Before we get started with the interview, I just want to remind everybody that I've got a new show website called obsessedwithwine.com. And on the website, you can see all of the episodes from last season. You can catch all of the episodes from this current season, season 2, as well as a bunch of other things. I've got a gallery page on there where it shows all of my wine tasting adventures that I'm always adding stuff to. So pictures of my wine tasting trips and when I worked in the winery, things like that. So if you've never worked in a winery, but you're kind of curious on how it all goes, take a look at those pictures. It's actually pretty cool. So the other thing is I've got some wine quizzes on there. So if you're a wine nut and you want to go on there and check your knowledge of wine, I've got a red wine, a white wine, and a dessert wine quiz on there. So go in there and check it out just for fun and, try it out and see what you know about wine. So anyhow, so tonight we've got a special guest. His name is Alex Reynolds, and Alex is a winemaker for a winery in Paola, Kansas. It's called Somerset Ridge Vineyard and Winery. And I'm super excited to have Alex on because I've never had a wine from Kansas. I didn't even know they made wine in Kansas, being out here in California. So I'm really excited to get educated by Alex on everything that they're doing out there. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and bring Alex on. Alex, welcome to the show. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining.
Hey, Wesley. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, you and I were just talking a little bit before we got started. And for those who don't know, Alex lives in Kansas City, and he got to go to the NFL draft this weekend. And so I'm super jealous about that. So just real quick, I thought I'd start with that. A big Kansas City Chiefs fan, obviously. So how was it at the draft this weekend?
I mean, it was great. It was a one-of-a-kind experience for the city. Had a ton of fun going down there, and just seeing everything that they built for the draft was pretty incredible. And most of all, hope the Chiefs got some good players this year. So time will tell. We'll wait and see.
We'll have to see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's start with you then. So I just want to kind of get started on how you found wine and and being in Kansas City and all that. So how did you get involved in wine? Did you grow up with wine? Was your family into wine? Like, how did this all start for you in Kansas?
Yeah, it's a great question. In fact, it did start with my family. My parents started Somerset Ridge Vineyard and Winery back in the late 90s when I was in it would have been third or fourth grade at the time. So a pretty interesting choice for people living in the Midwest. But, it quickly kind of became a lifestyle for us and this kind of all-encompassing thing. That we did. And so started growing grapes in the late 90s, making our first vintages in the early 2000s. So really spending my late childhood, early adolescence working in the vineyard and winery all the way up through college and just getting into it that way. And, in addition, I mean, my family was huge into wine just from a connoisseur standpoint anyway. So that was great for me to have some early exposure to really excellent wines and just to be, I think with a lot of wine drinkers, people can think about having that light bulb moment with their first great glass of wine or where they really became kind of a convert and obsessed with wine, not to steal the name of your show.
Yeah.
But I was just very fortunate to be able to have those experiences growing up and drinking great wines with my families too, and just getting exposure to it.
So what was it about, what was your family, what made them decide, all right, we're going to start this winery and we're going to do it right here in Kansas? Like, how did that all start for them?
Yeah, it's a dang good question. I don't know that I have a complete answer for you, but so it all started with my family's appreciation for wine. I think so much so that they wanted to get into the producing side. I mean, in the 90s, you could say that grape growing and winemaking was still a very nascent industry in the Midwest, but it's not entirely true. I mean, I think a lot of people would be, in fact, pretty surprised to learn that the first registered AVA, or American Viticultural Area in the country, It wasn't in California, wasn't anywhere coastal. It was actually Augusta, Missouri, and I think 1974 or 77. So there's been a rich history of winemaking in this part of the world that's flown a little bit under the radar in comparison to what you see out on the coast. And so um, this was kind of a tradition that my family had tapped into when they started growing grapes and making wine, but it wasn't something that was totally novel at the time. You know, there was definitely wineries in this part of the world and a longstanding tradition of winemaking, albeit from grapes that I would say most people probably have not heard of. And I'm sure that's something we'll talk more about tonight. I mean, a lot of what we're growing are considered generically, they're just termed hybrids. So not typical Vitis vinifera varietals that you're working with on the coast, though we do grow some of those as well. Primarily what we're growing are grapes that are more tailor-made and suited for our climate, and particularly our colder winters and higher average annual rainfall. You need vines that are better suited to an adverse environment than you do at the coast, where you have, say, a more idealized growing environment.
So you mentioned a second ago about a aha moment with a bottle or a glass of wine. Did you yourself have anything like that was like, wow, this wine really got me into it? What was that all about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's two wines that really stick out for me. I think first and foremost was a 1990 Chave Hermitage, and love Northern Rhone Syrah anyway. But I think that was a moment for me that just demonstrated that great wine can kind of be this transcendental thing, and that wine grapes do have the capacity to transmit the character of time and place and be unbelievably delicious too. And I think in particular that wine shows such a range of non-fruit oriented character that it's just kind of mind blowing. You know, you're thinking about all that pepper, bacon fat, I mean, just smoke, crazy stuff like that you don't typically associate as having come from fruit. And then the other would be 91 Mondavi Tokalan cab, just those early Mondavi cabs that kind of gave me a sense of kind of classic Napa, early 90s Napa that I fell in love with, more Bordelais compared to what you're encountering today, but just again, incredibly complex, super delicious, and I think that was it for me.
So when you were growing up, like you said, your parents started growing grapes and all that stuff. You were working in the winery, I mean the vineyard and all that stuff. Were you into it then, or was it like your parents just made you do it and you kind of fell in love with it later?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in early adult life, when you have more of the capacity and the ability to enjoy the literal fruits of your labor, it's more compelling. As a kid, it's not really that distinguishable from more traditional agriculture, which is pretty tough,
Yeah.
But definitely it was something I came to appreciate the more I did it and the older I got, and then eventually, of course, decided to pursue it as a career.
So as far as education is concerned, so you first went to University of Kansas, got a bachelor's degree, I guess, in political science.
Yes.
Was there ever a thought that you were going to do anything other than wine, or was that just, I'm going to go get a bachelor's degree and then kind of see what happens after that?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I definitely just wanted to, graduate from college, have the college experience, but then thought too that, maybe want to do the law school thing, be an attorney. And I think by the time of my end of my time at college, I wasn't super. I didn't find that to be the most compelling option, which I think you don't want to pursue law school with tepidly. You need to be all in, and so decided not to go that way. And I think I'm happy I chose wine instead.
So does the University of Kansas, do they have any wine classes or anything like that at all?
They may now. When I was there, they did not. Really, the regional schools for grape growing and winemaking, really it was University of Missouri, who for a long time had a great enology program that was led by Hildegard Heyman, who, if anybody's listening that is familiar with UC Davis, she's of course of UC Davis fame. Kansas State, which has traditionally been more of an agricultural school, did have an enology extension as well. You have some smaller community colleges, things like that. So it's definitely there. I mean, we have a lot of really smart people in this part of the world dealing with grapes, growing grapes, making wine, and educating other people about it. So I was lucky to have some exposure to that prior to my time at Davis, but uh, you know, it's certainly not like what you see in New York State or Oregon or California. Not quite as robust, but it is here.
Yeah. So when you were finished and you decided that you decided on Davis, I guess, for your wine education, why Davis and not something maybe closer to where you were or something like that?
Well, I mean, I think it was a pretty natural choice. Certainly in my mind, the most renowned school for winemaking. Coincidentally, my younger sister, who's also in the wine industry, was doing her undergrad in viticulture and enology at Davis at the same time. So it really felt like a natural fit.
Hmm.
And, you know, loved it. Loved California. Loved the whole thing.
So so if I understand correctly, so you finished your education and you worked at the family winery for a while before coming out to California for further
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah, I did. So spent really those first few years after college working at my family's vineyard and winery. And then after my wife and I got married, we decided to move out to California and really worked all over. I started out my first harvest working in the cellar at a winery in Calistoga called Tamber Bay, which
Hmm.
was a great winery, particularly cool because it was a production facility for Thomas Rivers Brown. If you know him, he's kind of one of the top guns in the valley right now in terms of consulting winemaking, and was just a really unique window into his protocol, the way he approaches wine, and then getting to work with fruit from all over the place. So top flight Napa Cab, Sonoma Coast Pinot, Chard, Zinfandel, everything. That was really a great entree into my California experience. And then shortly thereafter, took a job as the enologist for Deloach Vineyards, which is out just to the west of Santa Rosa, right there in Russian River Valley. And they're more of a boutique producer that focuses on Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Zinfandel. Did that for two harvests and was promoted to an assistant winemaker for the parent company, the Boistet collection, and then had the opportunity to produce wines again for Deloach, for Buena Vista
Hmm.
Vineyard and Winery, and also Raymond Vineyards on the Napa side, in addition to a pretty wide swath of custom crush clients as well.
Wow. So that's quite quite a difference, I guess, in a whole bunch of different places that you got to
Yeah,
experience, which is cool.
you, you got to see the whole gamut of style, winemaking philosophy, fruit, and I mean, particularly compared with my experience coming from the Midwest. I mean, it was a pretty fantastic range of experience. Yeah.
So for people like me who don't know, what are some big differences? Obviously, there's some obvious differences between making wine in California versus, say, where you are in Kansas. But like, what are some things maybe we don't think about that are some big differences between the two?
Well, I mean, I think at the top, you just have to start with the fact that we're growing different grapes. Again, I
Yeah.
mentioned it earlier, but you know, when we talk about varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, et cetera, on down the line, what we're really talking about are traditional European wine grapes or Vitis vinifera. And in the Midwest, we tend to grow hybrids. So those are uh, grapevines that have partial vinifera parentage, but have been bred over successive generations with other grapevines like Vitis aestivalis or rupestris or labrusca in order to have more desirable disease and resistance and cold tolerance qualities so that they can really thrive and excel in our climate. So in the Midwest, we're working with grapes like Chardonnay, Traminette, Chambourcin, Norton, La Crescent. I mean, I could list on, but it's this whole genre of grapes that most people in the wider wine drinking world really have either never heard of or have um, very little experience with. So that's the big thing. I mean, the other thing obviously is going to be our climate compared to the coast in California, where you have really this arid Mediterranean, just gorgeous climate for growing grapes. We are more cool and continental. We get all 4 seasons very intensely. So our growing season is typically much shorter than what you'd find on the coast, and that's definitely reflected in the wine style as well.
Hmm.
And then I think a key component in that too is moisture, rain, snow, everything under the sun that you really don't deal with on the coast, you deal with here. So from a farming perspective, it can be tremendously challenging. I think
Yeah.
viticulture in the Midwest is I won't say on a different level, but in terms of the challenge and what you need to do in the vineyard in order to achieve consistency year in and year out, it's dramatically different. So those would be, I think, the two big things up front, right? The grapes we're growing and climate, and then on down the line to wine style, the market, what people enjoy here. You and I were talking off air a little bit, and I mentioned that, for every person I see that comes into our tasting room that wants nice dry wines, traditional style wines, there's people too that expect something with residual sugar,
Hmm.
dessert wines, other things of that nature. So I think too, where rather than just focusing on one or two varietals or a particular house style, we really try and run the gamut in terms of what we do in the Midwest generally, and certainly at Somerset Ridge, to try and have wines that will fit for a really wide audience of people that come into our tasting room.
So that brings me then to the next question, which is what is the wine country and what is the, I mean, I'm thinking of California wine country, obviously, because that's where I live. But like, what is the wine country like in Kansas? And I guess it sounds like consumer tastes also are a little bit different out there too.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's really beautiful. I think, we're on the Kansas side. We're actually really close to the state line with Missouri. So I kind of think of us as in being in a really similar region. And Missouri historically has had a huge wine growing history and wine tourism. Augusta, Herman, those are the two really big sites that are situated along the Missouri River. It's really pretty. I think big wineries today. I mean, I think you're seeing wineries that I'm just guesstimating here, but you're looking at wineries at their largest that are probably in the 40 to 50,000 case per year range. So really considerable operations. Again,
Yeah.
gorgeous, situated on a river, on the Missouri River. To me, it's almost like being in the Mosel, being in Germany. It
Hmm.
can be really pretty, different than what you would see in California, certainly. But I think when you walk into a tasting room in the Midwest, it's just geared to be a little bit different. I think what a lot of operations do and what we do is try and have people down for a long time, let them have wine on site, listen to music, have great food from chefs that we employ or with food trucks, and really have kind of an experience and make a day of it. Whereas, traditionally tasting rooms on the coast are more come in, make your appointment, here's the
Yeah.
wines, here's the order sheet, and bon voyage. We
Yeah.
treat it a little bit differently and have it be more of a total experience for people.
So, in a second, I want to ask you about these wine grapes that you guys grow because it's going to be a big education for me.
Yeah.
Because I've never I've never experienced them, just like you were saying. So, I guess let's go. You guys grow on at Somerset Ridge. Somerset Ridge, you guys grow 12 different varieties of grapes. Is that right?
Yeah, thereabouts. I mean, so one of the things we do, and one of the things in this world, I mean, new grapevines that are potentially intriguing to us are being developed all the time. So, in addition to what we grow in larger volume for most of our main wines, we always have at least a few rows plotted out for um, an audition vineyard, you could say, for promising
Okay.
varietals that are coming out. So in reality, it's much more than 12. But we to keep it within a reasonable scope, I think there's really for us I'm going to say a big four of hybrids that we focus on. On the white side, that's Chardonnay and Traminette. And I'll talk about those two more specifically in a bit. And
Hmm.
then on the red side, we focused on a grape called Chambourcin and Norton. And get a lot of mileage out of those four varieties. Historically, those have what are what have done uh, best in our region and have shown an ability to produce really consistently a commercial quality wine.
Hmm.
But we do grow quite a bit more than that. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure where you want to start, but I can talk about any of those in more detail. I mean, we did bring some wines here for tasting too, so happy to talk about those as we sip along as well.
Yeah, so I definitely want to start with the whites. And so the first one is you guys do make a Chardonnay. Is that right or no?
Uh, we do. So we do grow chard of the vinifera varietals that we grow,
Hmm.
Cabernet Franc and Chardonnay. We do have both of them. They're both smaller volume reserve wines for us in order
Hmm.
to um, achieve ripeness on consistently on traditional vinifera varieties. We're working with a very low yield. So for those that would have familiarity, we're working in about 1 ton per acre yield, which is very small.
Hmm.
But it's necessary for us in order to achieve appropriate phenolic and sugar ripeness in order to make the wine that we want to make ultimately.
Hmm.
Um, what I brought here tonight is a wine called Chardonnay, which
Hmm.
very similar sounding name.
Which I
That
have
is
here.
a right. So that's a
Hmm.
hybrid of Chardonnay. So Chardonnay crossed with a vine called Saval Blanc. Um, a stalwart wine for us. We produce it in several different styles, but of our dry table wine that brought here tonight, this is really a wine that I think on the palate shares a lot with Chardonnay. You get aromatically a lot of nice citrus, kind of grassiness that maybe one would more traditionally associate with Sauvignon Blanc, but it's
Hmm.
really stylistically, I think, fitting somewhere in between um, Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. It produces a really beautiful wine. We use it for sparkling, a tank fermented, non-malolactic wine, and then also a full mallow barrel fermented version as well. So it's a great grape for us.
So so is this a popular wine that you guys make there at Somerset Ridge?
Yeah, it's huge, and I think since the early 2000s, since we started really producing this in quantity, it's been by far one of our most popular wines. It just has naturally such a wonderful, citrus, orchard fruit, great minerality, that sort of flavor profile that's really recognizable to people. Common through line with a lot of our other wines, very nice, bright acidity, mineralic. So it's just a really beautiful white wine that I think is not stylistically too far of a departure from a lot of what people are used to drinking.
Yeah.
Um, so it's just a really nice entree into the hybrids into our world of grape growing here.
Well, like I said, tonight's the first night I've ever had Chardonnay, and I like it. To me, it's very
Well, thank you.
similar to it has a very similar profile to me that to a Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, not maybe
Yeah,
as powerful, but it's nice. It's very nice. I really enjoy it.
yeah. So for me, I mean, tons of green apple pear for me here. You do get just a little bit of the grassiness and citrus. Stone fruit as well, but just really nice. I mean, easy drinking, great all
Yeah.
year round. But I think particularly in the hotter months, this is what I'm reaching for.
So let's go on to the next one here. So I I picked out some specific ones to ask you about. So this one
Yeah.
is called La Crescent. Am I saying that right? La Crescent?
Yes. So La Crescent is one of the white varieties that we grow.
Yeah.
It's the kind of affectionately known as the Midwestern Riesling. Um, it really has a lot of that character, the same kind of terpene aromatic profile. So you're getting, again, high acid, tons of stone fruit, peach, apricot, things of that nature. Just really beautiful wine. I mean, that is a newer compared to Chardonnay, which we've really been growing since the late 90s.
Hmm.
Le Crescent came on more in the early 2010s, if I'm remembering correctly. I think our first vintage was around 12 or 13, but it's a fantastic varietal. With a lot of these, whether it be Traminette, Le Crescent, more of these Germanic style grapevines too. The growing pattern is very different than what you might see typically. I mean, for most people, they imagine a vineyard, or certainly a vineyard out in California. You're imagining a vine that's on a vertical shoot positioning style trellis. So you have your trunk, you have the two thicker cordons that are typically spur pruned, and then you have shoots for that year's growth that are going straight up. Well, with a lot of what we grow here, we grow them traditionally on a high wire system. So the fruiting canes and the cordon sit at about 6 feet up, and then they drape down actually back to the floor of the vineyard. We do that because it's more idealized for the vine. A lot of these hybrid varietals don't actually have the upright, very vertical growing pattern that we typically associate with Vitis vinifera. So they look very different in the vineyard, but still produce a really wonderful wine. But I think that's an experience for anybody that has not seen a Midwestern vineyard, is just how different it looks. There's just a much wider variety of pruning systems and trellis systems that you see here. And so this would be Le Crescent, Traminette. They draw a pretty stark contrast to what you see on the coast.
So if we're talking about Le Crescent first. So it's the Riesling of the Midwest. So what's the profile of a Le Crescent wine? Like, what's the flavor profile, etc.? Can you just tell me that?
Yeah. Again, I think you're looking at a lot of the terpene aromatics, tons of stone fruit. So again, you're working more with apricot, peach, certainly citrus as well. But yeah, it's going to be for us. We're working typically with these wines. We're working more in a reductive style, stainless steel tank fermented. So leaning more on those primary aromas, no malolactic. Stylistically, that can change between producers, but for what we try and do, we really try to highlight the natural fruit and character of the grape as it comes into the winery.
All right. So you mentioned Traminette already. And now I was telling you earlier, I'm a big fan of Gewürztraminer, and one of my favorite wines when I worked at the winery was to make Gewürztraminer, only because of the aromatics was so amazing. And so you guys make a Traminette. So tell us about the Traminette and how you guys make that.
Yeah, so for us, Traminette, similarly to how I was saying before, Traminette is for us done in stainless steel, totally reductive, meaning oxygen excluding, fermented in mid 60s. So we're trying to be incredibly delicate with the way whole cluster pressed for us. So we're trying to be incredibly delicate in the way that we treat the wine in order to preserve the integrity and the natural aromatic character of the wine. And as you mentioned, much like the Gewürztraminer, Traminette has that incredible perfume to it that is very distinctive once you know it. And perhaps if you don't, I mean, hard to explain, but it really is just incredibly perfumey, aromatic white wine. And I think that's what people expect of it and know it for. So when we're producing that wine, it's all about maintaining aromatics and the integrity of that initial fruit all the way through the process.
So I'm going to ask you about the fermentation because you mentioned it. So, so you guys have it's in stainless steel. It's fermented probably with some kind of, I guess, temperature regulation or something, and it's a real slow fermentation, right? I mean, it's one of those that it takes a little while because you want to make sure that the temperature doesn't get too high and fluctuates too much. Is that right? Or
Yeah. So, I mean, fermentation is going to be about 2 weeks in that style of wine. I mean, you will certainly see longer, so it's not an absurdly long time frame. But the point of all of our stainless steel tanks, and this is common to a lot of wineries, are hooked up to a glycol system where
yeah,
the tanks are jacketed, and you can actually circulate glycol or antifreeze through the tanks to keep them at a certain temperature. Fermentation, in addition to converting sugar to alcohol, produces a tremendous amount of heat. And
yeah,
a lot of the flavor and aromatic character and compounds that we talk about when we're describing wines are volatile, meaning that they can be boiled off. They can be lost during the fermentation process if temperatures get too high. They can be very delicate. So it's important when you're dealing particularly with white wines, more aromatically driven white wines, to stay, and for us, an iced pocket really between 65 and 70 degrees during fermentation in order to retain those aromas and flavors.
so the last white I have here that I wanted to ask you about is a Viognier. So you guys make a Viognier, right? And is it very similar to the style that maybe we're used to out here in California?
We do. I would say the difference, typically Viognier in its traditional growing environment is a very low acid, oily, full bodied white wine. It's incredibly aromatic, and ours is as well. It really leans on that beautiful, I think to me, that hallmark kind of herbal character that great Viognier can have, but in keeping with, I think the style and the character that's present with all of our wines due to our climate and our shorter growing season. That's much more high acid than what you would find in Condro or certainly on the coasts. And so,
Mhm.
again, that's going to be that through line to a lot of Midwestern wines, a lot of particularly white wines, is just that higher acid um, character. And it's, something that, if you're a fan of Chablis or a lot of German Rieslings, the
Mhm.
acidity that we're talking about is going to be very familiar to you. But if you spent most of your time drinking, Napa or Sonoma Chardonnay, it's going to be a little bit. It's going to be a tick above. It's going to be a little bright. But I think that's one of the hallmarks of our wines that you really have to bring up, is that just bright acidity and great minerality.
So let's go to the reds now. So let's start with Norton because you mentioned it earlier. So that's kind
Yeah.
of a big, it's a big wine that you guys make there. It's is the Norton. So tell me about Norton and what does it compare to that's something that a lot of us have had, if there is anything.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a great comparison, honestly. It's
Okay.
incredibly unique. So it is actually the parentage is unknown. I suppose that from what I've read, there's some speculation that perhaps it shares some of its genetics with Pinot Meunier, but I'm actually not 100% on that. But it's considered a really Native American grapevine. So it's one of the few vines that we grow, number one, that's not on a grafted rootstock. It's own rooted, which is very interesting. But it is tough as nails. It survives the coldest of affected by downy or powdery mildew. Really gorgeous vine. So I should say too, it's a red grape. It produces a red wine, and we make a red table wine from that, and then it's also an essential component in our ports as well. But chemically, very, very interesting, and that this can kind of be a winemaker's worst nightmare. But for a red wine, it's incredibly high acid, but also very high pH, which is a really odd combination. But Norton really, it's been grown in this part of the world since the mid 1800s at least, and every major winery in this region, particularly in Missouri, is going to have at least one Norton for you to try. It's incredibly, looking at the flavor and aroma profile. I think you're have to first acknowledge the spiciness. It's an incredibly peppery wine, more high tone red fruit, cherry, strawberry. We do 12 months of American oak aging on ours as well. So we do get a little barrel character, but just a very unique wine that, yeah, on the vinifera side, I don't really think that there is a comparison you could make. It is just totally unique to this part of the world.
That's awesome. All right, so the next one you kind of touched on already. You said you guys do a Cabernet Franc a little bit, though, like a very little bit, right? So
Yeah.
tell me about that, I guess, a little bit. And anybody who listens to this knows Cabernet Franc's my favorite varietal. So that's why I'm going to ask you about it. And I know you do a little bit of it. So just tell me about that, and maybe what some of the differences are in the profile compared to what we get out here, or what we may have had before.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, as I mentioned earlier, Cabernet Franc, Chardonnay, two vinifera varietals that we do grow. Like with the Chardonnay, in order to achieve ripeness, sugar ripeness and also phenolic ripeness, so by that I mean concentration of tannin and color, anthocyanin in this case, necessary to produce a really great wine, we have to limit yields and extend hang time quite a bit. So in the vineyard, it takes a lot of work for us to make Cabernet Franc, but it, to my estimation, makes a pretty exceptional wine for us. And it's something that's certainly very unique in our profile. Compared to what you would find on the coast, this is going to be much lighter bodied, more red fruit driven. Again, higher acid, as with everything else I've mentioned. The growing environment is totally different. In California, it's not going to be uncommon to hear of producers leaving Cabernet Franc to 26, 27 bricks or above, amazingly. And here we're really trying to get to that 23 and a half, 24 bricks range. And again, end up with a wine that is right around 13 and a half, 14% alcohol. So stylistically, very different, very different. Ripeness, we are much on the less ripe scale compared to what you're going to see in California. But I think you do with that get something that is aromatically maybe a little bit more nuanced at its best. I mean, it's less of a sledgehammer, less certainly less dark fruit driven than what you're going to see on the coast. So it'll provide an interesting contrast for sure to anyone that's able to taste a Midwestern Cabernet Franc against something you'd find in California.
So is the Cabernet Franc something that the Midwestern, your clients in the Midwestern, do they enjoy that? Is that something that they like?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's one of our top wines. It's a reserve wine for us, so it does fantastically well. Most of it's on allocation. So I think the folks that have had an appreciation for our wines and a familiarity with Somerset Ridge over the years know that that's one of the more special ones. But I think anytime you're working with Cabernet Franc, Chardonnay, a vinifera varietal with a recognizable name, you really just have a built-in advantage there in the market.
Yeah.
Because that's really I think the impediment for Midwestern wines reaching a larger audience is a lot of people have not heard of the grapes that we're growing, and it takes probably more curiosity than a lot of people would be willing to give in order to pick that up off the store shelf and give it a shot.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Yeah. So let's talk about this. Another one that you guys, another red that I'm not familiar with, and you mentioned it already, but I don't know how to say it as well as you do. Chambourcin?
Chambourcin, yeah.
Chambourcin. So tell me about that one a little bit.
Yeah, so again, this is part of the big four I mentioned. Chambourcin produces an incredible range of wines for us. We use it in fully dry and semi-sweet platforms. I mean, it is going back to, I would say, the mid-'70s when grape growing really started to go on in earnest in this part of the world. It has been a key or a really core component to what we've done and other producers in the region have done. The wines that I sent to you actually here, I didn't send to you a red wine, but actually a rosé that we produced of Chambourcin called Aphrodite. So again, using it in a variety of contexts. But it's a grape that I think it's one of the few non-vinifera, excuse me, red varietals that we grow that on its own has the potential to make a really exceptional dry red wine.
Hmm.
To me, at its best, I think it shares a lot of similarities with Gamay. So, if you were a Beaujolais fan, I think it's something that you'll enjoy. I mean, darker fruit, very floral, uh, uh, more structured, um, more structured tannin in comparison, and more relatable to what you would experience with a lot of vinifera-based reds,
Hmm.
which is a rarity for us. I mean, I think one of the things this region naturally does really well is the higher acid aromatic white wines and increasingly sparkling wines, but certainly in comparison to the coast, those really dry, big bodied red wines are something that are harder for us to do just because of our
Hmm.
climate and the grapes that we're able to grow. But Chambourcin is really the grape that allows us to compete in that arena and produce something that I think is special
Hmm.
and a signature, really a signature wine for uh, Somerset Ridge and for the Midwestern wine growing region in general.
All right, so I've got really quickly, I got a couple more I want to ask you about. I appreciate your patience because this is all awesome information. I mean, for somebody like me who likes all kinds of wine, this is cool because I get to learn about things I've never heard of. So, Crimson Cabernet is something else that you guys have there. Is that? Tell me about
Yes,
that.
this is
And the next
yeah,
one is going
this
to be
is
Marquette. So,
sure. So Crimson Cabernet, that is really new to the region. We were one of the first producers in the world to actually do a commercial bottling of this grape, and so it's a hybrid of Cabernet Sauvignon and Norton, the grape we previously spoke about. So the goal being to get the incredible disease resistance and cold hardiness of Norton married with the flavor profile of Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not widely available in grape nurseries, and the genetics are still under lock and key. So it's not even entirely uh, clear the exact breakdown of parentage, the proportion. I mean, um, but it's a grape that we love because it's really unique to us. We're one of the few producers in the world, like as I mentioned, that are able to do a commercial bottling of this grape. And I think at its best, it really does get you pretty close to a classic Cabernet Sauvignon flavor profile, which for us is uh, amazing. We'll take it 7 days a week, just
yeah.
again because it's very rare in this growing region to be able to produce a wine of that style. And then Marquette is a hybrid that I believe by percentage it's the largest vinifera parent is Pinot Noir, and it does share some, I would say, some aromatic and flavor uh, profile with Pinot. For us, we really use that almost exclusively for rosé. It's a grape that is capable of incredible yields in excess of 10 tons per acre, which is magnificent. If you'll remember, I mentioned for our Cabernet Franc, we are pruning back to about 1 ton
Yeah.
per acre. So to literally have 10 times the yield is pretty exceptional. But again, it's a grape that's incredibly popular, higher acid, higher toned red fruit that we just love for rosé.
So I want to ask you about your winemaking style. So Alex, if you
Yeah.
had to give us kind of your idea, what is your, I guess, besides winemaking style, like what is your philosophy on making wine and all that stuff? Just tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think so. The interesting thing is, I think there's two very separate parts of me, right? There's the California side and all of the experience I accrued in that world, and then there's really the Midwestern side, and the instincts and the philosophy that you can develop around great Pinot, Chardonnay, great Cabernet. You can really throw that out the door when you're talking about its applicability to Midwestern wines. I think over the years, and certainly since I've been back in Kansas, what I've learned and really started to internalize with these grapes is don't try and make them into something that they're not. You don't
Yeah.
need to be chasing the bigger, riper styles that you see on the coast. You really need to let these wines speak for themselves. So not being afraid of higher acidity than you might typically find, not trying to reach for excessive ripeness, but instead doing what you can to be as delicate as possible, certainly at pressing and during fermentation with these grapes. And I think for me, I tend to think on the production side with a lot of my decisions as reductive versus oxidative. And for a given wine, what pathway do I want to go down? What stylistically is going to make the most sense? And I think for a lot of these wines that we've talked about, our white wines, rosés, and even some of our reds, that lean so heavily on their aromatic character and their elegance, it's that reductive, oxygen excluding style that really allows them to be their best. So that's what we go for. I mean, I think the white wines really speak for themselves and stand on their own and draw a very easy contrast between what you'll get here and at the rest of the market. And I think the reds we've increasingly on the drier side found our footing, and certainly for me, found my footing in the idea that you're not trying to make a high alcohol fruit bomb here. You're letting these wines be what they want to be, which is higher acid, I would say more aromatically driven, and just true to this part of the world, in this growing region.
Yeah. So let me ask you about a couple more things here, because I was obviously the website is very good. It gives so much information. I learned a ton from just going on the website. So
Great.
I don't know if you have a hand in that, but it was very helpful. So
I don't. I'm not the web guy. Unfortunately, I wish I could take credit for that. Yeah.
So you guys, it says that you ship wine to 38 states.
We do.
And that must be a headache in just being able to get all of that done. I mean, do you have any knowledge of how that all goes? I mean, it must be a tremendous effort just to get all of that done.
It is. I mean, we have wine club members spread out all over the country, but I think to be fair, shipping is not a problem that is exclusive to a Kansas winery or any Midwestern winery. As you probably, this is really a relic of the Prohibition era, but every state essentially has its own alcohol laws and laws governing the shipping and transportation of alcohol. Certainly, we use a company called Vino Shipper to handle. They're one of the bigger players now, but to handle a lot of what we do. But certainly, yeah, you're right. Navigating state liquor laws and shipping is it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. I think all producers would be much happier if we had a more cohesive, simplified set of laws for alcohol in general, and certainly as far as shipping is concerned. But it's something that we do it all ourselves. I mean, I think on our wine club release weekends, the back of the winery is loaded with mountains of cardboard 6-pack shippers and everything else ready to go out all across the country. So it's those are always wild weekends, but we're appreciative for them and for our customers who enjoy our wines.
So as the guy who makes the wine, right? Do you just, is it kind of like a a really satisfying thing that all of this wine that you're making is being sent all over the country and people are buying it and it's like going all over the country? I mean, to me, I always wanted to be a winemaker, but I mean, to me, it seems like it'd be so satisfying just knowing that, hey, whatever you're doing, people are appreciating and consuming and purchasing and all that stuff. I mean, it's got to be a pretty good feeling.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Just to have a tangible work product of any kind, I think brings a satisfaction of its own. But certainly when something like, this is a year-long pursuit. Every year you are seeing this come to fruition, literally from the start of the growing season, and then at times many vintages later. So it is something that's incredibly satisfying. And then to be able to bring joy to other people and see that other people appreciate what you do. I mean, everybody loves that. I know I do. I'm really happy to be able to make wines for people and to allow people to experience wines from the Midwest and oftentimes something that's totally different than what they've had before. That's kind of a cool experience in its own right, to feel like you're on the frontier of winemaking in some way, or grape growing, something that's actually a pretty uh, ancient tradition, a
Yeah.
very conservative idiom. There's not a lot of stylistic change that goes on in the wine world, and if it is, it kind of goes at a glacial pace. It's something that we kind of had the classics. We've had them for a long time, and then in our little part of the world, we're doing something new.
Yeah. So as we get towards the end here, I've got a couple things that I want to definitely ask you about. So you guys make some dessert wines, and I'm a huge dessert wine person. So I like all the dry stuff, but I love dessert wines. And I know
Yeah,
not a lot of, some people don't, but for me, I love the dessert wine. So you
yeah,
guys make a ambrosia, I think is what it's called. It's a late
yes. Late
harvest. So
harvest tournament.
yeah. So tell me about that. Like, what's the process for making that? Is it similar to late harvest wines that you would find, I guess, in just the process of how it's done out here? And so just talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, so we make several dessert wines. Ambrosia is one of our oldest. It's a late harvest Traminette. So there we're allowing, in most years, we're uh, able to achieve 29 to 30 bricks. So quite excessive ripeness for a dessert wine compared to what you would see for a table wine. And that's really the difference. You get fruit
Mm-hmm.
that is incredibly ripe, all the aromatic and flavor components that go along with that. But then you because at that point the grapes are essentially raisins, you get an incredibly small yield. So what ends up happening is the potential alcohol of that wine is so high that it's not physiologically possible for Saccharomyces, for yeast to ferment to full dryness. So we're typically left with a lusciously sweet dessert wine that is higher alcohol, certainly, and very long lived, but still retains, I think, those signature uh, aromatic components of Traminette, in sharing with Gewürztraminer, other Germanic varietals that people love so much. Uh, that's not the only thing we do. We actually get pretty exotic with it. One of our most popular wines is called Citron, which
Mm-hmm.
is a fortified wine using brandy made from our grapes, again, a base of Traminette, and then organic lemons. And so there's no vodka or any other distillate in it, but it's really our wine based attempt to emulate an Italian limoncello. And it's if you haven't had it before, I think it's really again one of those one of a kind wines that you're probably not going to see anywhere else, but has been fantastically popular, and something that is just really, really fun to make, and totally different than what you would be able to do from a winemaking perspective pretty much anywhere else. So dessert wines are a pretty core feature of our portfolio. And then certainly I include port in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier that Norton is a huge component, that varietal for our port wines. So we use that here, and that classic process. So there you are essentially conducting a red wine fermentation, and then adding brandy. For us, usually between 9 and 10 bricks, so 9 to 10% residual sugar remaining. You are adding very high alcohol, high proof brandy. So you're immediately killing the yeast and stopping fermentation, and are subsequently left then with this really beautiful high alcohol sweet wine that then we allow to age in barrel for 24 months.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So is there a grape, or is there a type of wine that you have never made that you would love to someday make? It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you can make happen in Kansas, but is there something like that you would just love to get your hands on and do some and make some wine out of?
Yeah. I think I always had a dream of doing a harvest in the Northern Rhone, whether it be Cornas or Hermitage or Côte Rôtie. So let's just say great Northern Rhone Syrah for sure. But then similarly, um, I would love to have some experience with Alsatian Riesling and potentially being able to do a harvest there. That's just such a special part of the world anyway. And those wines, I think, are so fantastic and so unique. I, yeah, I would say Alsatian Riesling and the Northern Rhone Syrah for me. I'd relish the chance to make wine from either of those.
Yeah. So we talked about this Chardonnay, and it's very good. I really enjoyed this.
Thank
So
you.
my question to you is, why can I not find this readily available around here anywhere? Is it because there's so many other wines that are filling the shelves, or is it just harder to get wines from Kansas on shelves in California? I'm just looking for you to educate me on how this works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything you said. I mean, the truth about the wine industry and the wine market is that it's pretty saturated. You have a lot of producers. I mean, if you were to go into a to a store, I mean, if I don't know if we're talking a grocery store or Total Wine or something, but there could be
Yeah.
hundreds of Chardonnays, right? And
Hmm.
so you have a lot of competition for, especially outside of market, for shelf space. But then
Hmm.
I think the more core thing is just building up a familiarity with people in the market with these varietals that they haven't heard of, and that's kind
Yeah.
of a, we'll call it a war of attrition. That's something that you really have to chisel away at, and you
Yeah.
have to kind of convert people one to one by one, saying, "Hey, here's some Chardonnay. Give it a try. This is actually really beautiful. It's something that you're going to enjoy, and it's something that is certainly going to be from a different part of the world than you're used to, but it has merit and it's really delicious." But as with anything, it's kind of a war for people's attention and their time and their interest. And I think when you're in a Midwestern winery in a smaller market anyway, it's an uphill battle. But it's always kind of been an uphill battle. And I think the state of the wine industry, certainly in this part of the world, is vastly ahead of where it was even in the late 90s when Somerset Ridge was, first conceived. And I think awareness of wine in the Midwest generally is just in a totally different place than it really has ever been. So I don't know how soon it is before we'll see any Kansas Chardonnays on California store shelves, but for anybody who wants to seek it out, it will be here. And I can tell you, if you want to go to somersetridge.com, we've got plenty of it for you to order.
Well, I can't wait to try the ones that you sent, the other ones that you sent.
Yeah,
And, and it's such a tremendous value is looking at just what you guys charge for a bottle and all that stuff. I mean, it's such a
yeah,
tremendous value. So, and I was looking at the wine club and everything. So I may sign up for the wine club just so that I can try all of those other wines. I don't know if they all come with the club or not. I didn't look into it that closely, but I'm thinking I would do that. And so that I can take advantage of all these great things that I've never had. For people who know me, I like to try things I've never had before. So I don't like to stick to the same old thing. So this is fascinating to me. So
well, variety is the spice of wine.
yeah, good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, finally, I just want to say, Alex, thank you for joining. It's been awesome. The reason I do this podcast is to not only to learn myself, but to educate people on all the different wines that are out there that you can try that are being made. It's not just the ones that you see on the shelf all the time. There's so many great things made all over the country. And when you agreed to come on, I was super excited to talk about what you're doing out there in Kansas. And if I ever get out to Kansas, I will love to come by and see what you're doing. Just the stuff you talked about with how the vineyard looks different and just the way you guys do things over there would be super awesome. I would love to do that. So I appreciate you joining, Alex. And I'm going to go ahead and I've got the website and everything for everyone so that they can go and check it out. But definitely check it out. Try these wines if you've never had them before. They're definitely quite an experience, and I think you're going to love them just as much as I did. So thank you, Alex.
thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, appreciate it. Take care now.
Bye.